You've heard of buying a book because of the cover, but I recently bought a book because of its title. Assistant to the Villain is a cozy fantasy about a girl who becomes an assistant to the villain and falls in love with him. Villains? Big fan. Villain romances? I'm a big fan. But apparently this book got published because the author has a very famous TikTok series, which means that it could either be a really fun hidden gem or it's going to be kind of bad. So I thought I would read it for you guys and let you know my thoughts. This video is going to be generally spoiler free unless I mention otherwise. Hello. I'm a little sick, hence my voice, but here's a little bit of an early update. The vibe of this book, as expected, is just very funny, very tongue-in-cheek, just like a little bit ridiculous, and I'm kind of enjoying that right now. I love the map at the beginning. It just has all these like cute little things like evil to-do list, steal street signs, kidnap damsels, poison the village well, unicorn hunting grounds, and I can't wait to see those things. The villain is literally called the villain. Like, that's just how they refer to him. It's kind of making me think there's going to be a little bit of like meta commentary on villain stories and just general typical hero's journey stories. Let me give you an example of the humor. Right, the main character Evie finds like a job posting for assistant to the villain, and it says must be well organized, must enjoy working late nights and relish writing long documents, must be comfortable and even supportive of arson, torture and murder, and must not scream when there's an occasional dead body lying across your desk. Amazing. Okay, the humor in this book, it's not humoring anymore. Our main character Evie immediately after like 20 pages is thirsting after the villain, you know? And I want to say who can blame her, you know, it's a villain, but also I just don't get it. Like, he's barely been described. I don't know anything about this man other than that he's a villain, but she keeps like thirsting over his deep V-neck and how his laughter is so like deep and attractive. And I'm like, who is this guy? Who is he? Just examples of the humor in this book, and I guess these are like light spoilers, but this is just happening at like the beginning of the book. For example, Evie, our main character, goes to a healer, and the healer asks Evie to kind of like get ready for her and says like bend over, and then Evie's like, oh, perhaps you could buy me dinner first, you know, that kind of humor. Or something that happens at 30 pages into the book. Our main character Evie is telling the healer that she had a dream about the villain, and then the healer's like, oh, was it a dirty dream? And then at the end when she leaves, she's like, yes, it was a very dirty dream I had about the villain. And then like he's standing behind her, you know? That's like the extent of the plot so far. Which is really stupid, but to be honest, I am kind of low-key enjoying it. Okay, our main character just keeps thirsting over this villain, and there's nothing wrong with a bit of yearning, but we are on page 50. 50. And she's already head over heels in love with this man. Intermission. Hello and welcome to all villains with romance aspirations. Today we are going to be answering the age-old question: why do we love villains so much as love interests? I asked you guys on my Instagram to share what makes villains so shippable to you, and I'm gonna share the most common answers with you because I thought that would be funny. But before we get into that, a quick word from our sponsor, G2A! G2A is the largest online marketplace for digital products and video games. Autumn is the perfect time to cozy up inside with a little game, and on G2A you can find all the discounts available in your area, all neatly in one place. They have something for every console, so whether you play on your PC, your Nintendo Switch like I do, your PlayStation, your Xbox, etc., they've got something for everyone. So click the link in the description to check out if G2A has something for you. What makes villains so attractive? The first common answer was very simply that they are simply sexy. They're just hot. Let's get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of why that is. Another very common answer was the banter that often exists between our hero and the villain. That the villain can often be the one to say what no one else is allowed to say. You know, they say the thing that everyone is thinking. Villainous characters tend to be more allowed to be a little quippy, a little sarcastic, as opposed to our more moral and serious main characters, and this often leads to really great sarcastic banter with the main character, and I fully agree with this. I love this, and you can't help but ship to people who have great banter. This pen is not working very well anymore. Whoops. Okay, another one that was very often mentioned is that villains are simply dark and broody, and that's attractive. I mean, it makes sense if you think about the fact that almost every love interest in fantasy romance books is the exact same, and that is just some tall dude with dark hair and a very broody sentiment to it. Like, they're all the same. Even if they're not villains, all these love interests are basically having the villainous appearance where they're dark and broody, but then they're the heroes of the story, because authors have caught on that people just like the dark and broody stereotype, and villains tend to have that. Okay, the next one that I saw very often, I found very interesting. A lot of people mentioned that villains just tend to have more depth. They tend to have more layers to them. They often have, you know, like a tragic backstory that kind of explains their character, and therefore they are automatically always the more interesting characters. I thought this was very interesting because there's nothing about a hero character that says that they can't have the layers or they can't have an interesting backstory. You know, there's nothing about villains that would make them the sole haver of personality in a story, and any good and well-written heroic character should also have layers, should also have an interesting backstory. But I do think that a lot of stories, especially if you look at like older like fairy tales, like old Disney stories, things like that, usually the heroes don't have too many layers because they need to be good, and then the villains are the only ones that get like that extra bit of backstory to explain their character, automatically making them more interesting because they kind of live in that moral grayness. It's easy to make heroes one-dimensional because they just need to be good. I really do believe that in any good story, the villain should not be the only one that has depth. Like, it really shouldn't be like that. This next one that was often mentioned as a reason for why villains are so shippable might be one of my personal favorites, and that is that it is automatically just forbidden. Right? Because it's literal enemies to lovers. Like, they aren't just like enemies and like, oh, they kind of maybe don't like each other, or they have some prejudice against each other. No, they are nemesis. They are the hero and the villain. They are the most enemy that anyone can ever enemy. Automatically adding so much tension to their dynamic, automatically making it forbidden, and you can't really help but ship that a little bit. This, I think, is one of the main reasons I tend to ship the villains and heroes. A common trope for villains is that they have this kind of like special interest in the main character. Like, they have kind of a soft spot for the main character, or maybe they kind of want the main character to join them. And this has incredible shipping potential. A lot of you mentioned that you love it when the villain has this trope of like, oh, they don't care about anyone, they only care about our main character. A quote that was very often mentioned was, heroes would kill their love for the world, but villains would kill the world for their love. So the appeal of the villain for a lot of people is that it's like, he's evil, he likes nobody except the main character, you know, the main character is special to them. Personally, this isn't my favorite, but that's just because I'm not really a fan of the trope of like, oh, I would burn the entire world for you. Not personally my thing. I do, however, what I really do really like, wow, great sentence. What I really do really like about this special interest thing is when the villain has like an interest in the main character that no one else has, therefore pushing them to be someone, to be better in a way that no one else does. For example, I love the trope where like the main character has magic and they can't really use it to their full potential because everyone around them is like, no, you must like keep yourself in check. And then the villain is the only one that's like, hey, you have like incredible power, and if you join my side, I will teach you how to be the best that you can be. And then I cannot help but ship it. Especially if this is like a female main character who other people are trying to kind of rein in and put a little damper on their power, and then the villain is like, you got great power and you should be proud of yourself. I love that stuff. Okay, that's it. Also, I loved it when villains are just like shamelessly flirty. Love that. Thanks for coming to my class. I am a fire hazard. Wow. Okay, vibes. Welcome to the villain's lair. Let's talk about villain romances for a second. Okay, I have one major gripe with this book that honestly makes me so angry, but we'll talk about some other things first. The funny thing that I've noticed about this book is that by nature of it being a story about someone who's the assistant to a villain, it is not a villain romance. And that is not the book's fault. That is just like by nature. You might pick that up. I did, because you always really like villains. You always ship main characters with villains. But because this is about an assistant to a villain, it stops being a villain romance and instead becomes an office romance. That's basically what this book is. It is an office romance because our main character is the assistant and the villain is her boss. She constantly talks about how she shouldn't, you know, like ogle her boss as much as she does. It's an office romance, and that's actually pretty funny. Like, it's not the fault of this book. It's just something that you need to keep in mind when you pick up this book, is that obviously by nature of what this book is trying to do, it's not gonna be an enemies to lovers villain romance, because the villain is not the antagonist of the story. You know, our villain character isn't actually the villain of the story. He is the boss character, and our main character is the employee. Now let's talk about this villain character. We are constantly told how scary and menacing and creepy he is, and it's very clear that the author is kind of relying on the reader to just instantly like villainous characters, and kind of us projecting everything we know about villain characters and all the villain characters that we've loved onto this character, because she does not develop him as his own being. She just introduces him as the villain and constantly tells us that he's really scary. And I'm like, okay, am I supposed to find him hot? I mean, the main character definitely does. And I'm gonna be honest, this book, it's not really hitting for me, but I'm also realizing that it's not really for me, I think. An example of something that happens around 100 pages into the book, I guess mild spoiler, I just want to talk about it because I think it exemplifies everything I'm not enjoying about this book. There's a very short fake dating scene in this book where the villain and Evie go to. They run into Evie's ex, so they kind of have to pretend that they're dating for a second. And I love that trope, but it just absolutely did not hit for me. And I think there's multiple reasons for that. The writing in this book does not focus on the feelings and emotions of the characters at all. Like, we barrel through the plot so quickly. Like, every single chapter, something random new is happening, some kind of conflict is introduced, but none of it feels thematically like it fits together. I feel like I'm just watching these characters do a bunch of random stuff and solving a bunch of random problems, but I don't feel like it's actually going somewhere. And this little fake dating scene just felt like another beat in this endless string of incoherent story points. And because there's so much focus on the plot and we don't really get to see a lot about the characters, I'm having a hard time caring about the little romance as well, because this is a romance, you know? It really is also about the romance between Evie and the villain. And I just don't care, because I don't care about these characters. That being said, that is definitely a subjective thing. I think that if you are a plot-driven reader, you might like this because it's very plot-heavy. But I just want to give a quick overview of who I think would like this book. 1, if you like plot-driven stories, the pace goes super fast, there's a lot happening in the plot. 2, the humor in this book kind of reminds me of Ali Hazelwood's humor, where it really hits for me, but then often it just kind of veers over into kind of cringe humor. So if you've read anything by Ali Hazelwood and you know that you like that, I think you might also like the humor in this book. And like one more example that I have of the humor is that Evie doesn't know the villain's real name. He's like, can you guess? Do you have like a guess for my name? And she's like, Fluffy? Is your name Fluffy? You see what I mean? Like, that's a very specific type of humor. Personally, for me, it's a little like, okay. But I understand that a lot of people might find that very funny. I think this book definitely falls into the category of cozy fantasy, despite it dealing with killing and villainous behavior. I, for example, didn't really enjoy Legends and Lattes, the cozy fantasy book that everybody loves. So maybe if you like Legends and Lattes, you might still like this book. And lastly, another thing that's just really missing with this story for me personally is that the main character is just thirsting over the villain from page 1. And I find it really boring when stories start out immediately with the main character being into the love interest. But if that is a trope that you like, it happens here. Okay, and now for my major gripe with this book. It's just not a villain assistant story. Like, I really feel like the map lied to me. The map really makes it seem like there's going to be all these funny things, like these characters doing villainous things, like poisoning village wells and stealing street signs. And that just doesn't happen. The whole plot of this story is just that there's a traitor within like the villain office, and the whole book is like this mystery story where they're trying to find out who the traitor is. They never do villainous stuff. Why? And I know that this is literally at the back of the book, that it's about a traitor, and I could have known this, but tell me I'm not the only one that when I heard about this book I thought, oh, we're going to see what it's like to be an assistant to a villain, and we're gonna see this assistant and the villain do funny villainous things. No! I wanted a story about an assistant having to deal with, you know, like finding dead bodies on her desk and setting things on fire and doing her funny little villain tasks. But it just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen at all. And I'm so sad. I'm like, how? That's so much missed potential. Now, I do know that this book is based on a TikTok series that I haven't watched. So it is possible that I just had the wrong expectation because I haven't watched that TikTok series. So I thought it would be fun if we kind of look at a few of the TikToks that the author made. Because apparently the author became pretty popular on TikTok because she made TikToks about, you know, a so-called assistant to a villain. And then that turned eventually into this book. So let's take a look. Let me open TikTok.
This is what I think it would be like if I was the morally great fantasy villain's personal assistant. Episode Evil Genius. Good morning, sir. I'm ready for my first day as an official villain. Wait, should I still be calling you sir? Should I try calling you by your real name? Here it goes. What happened? The boss doesn't even call me by my first name. No, he only ever calls me by my last name. Yes, sir, and my first act as an official villain is we're gonna crash a hero's wedding on Friday. I was thinking we would just go in, say something ominous, and then leave. Oh, with the cake. Okay, you can't look at me that intensely in public because I don't know what to do.
See, I would have loved to see them actually go crash a hero's wedding. That would be really funny. I want to see them do villain things. And no hate to the author, I think she makes very funny TikToks. I think, this is my theory, where this is going wrong is that when you make TikToks. I watch like a lot. I love watching TikToks about like heroes and villains and kind of stereotypes from fiction. I think that's always super funny, but it works really well on these kind of TikToks because as a viewer, you know, you're kind of, we all understand the trope of the villain, but that doesn't translate to a book. Like if you write a book about these characters in a TikTok series, you have to actually give them a lot more backstory and a lot more personality and layers, because you can no longer rely on the readers just kind of like projecting everything they know about every villain they've ever watched onto your little TikTok skit. You have to actually create an original character. You know what I'm talking about? Like TikTok skits like that, which again, I love them. I watch so many of these. My For You page is full with funny little skits, including character archetypes. They're always about like character archetypes, just like this assistant to the villain thing. But then when you're writing an actual book, you can't just rely on these archetypes anymore. You have to actually develop full layered characters. And I feel like that didn't really happen with this book. She just used the villain archetype and then that was the villain character. And it's like, but who is he? Who is this specific villain? I don't know. He's every single one of them. So yeah, this is not for me, but I am going to finish it. Maybe it'll get better. I will let you know. I finished it. I'm gonna need to light a candle and get myself a cup of tea before we can talk about this. Alright, there we are. I've got a black Earl Grey tea to fit the darkness of a villain's heart. Also, this turtleneck is turning me into a floating head, which honestly would be a funny villain. Just a floating head. Okay, so I finished this, and the first thing I want to say, there is nothing a bigger betrayal than reading a book you thought was a standalone only to find out that it has an open ending and that it's actually a series. I will not be reading the sequel. I really do stand by my theory that where this book went wrong is that it was a book based on a funny character archetype TikTok series, and therefore all of the characters were just cliches. Like, this book felt incredibly generic to the point that I was forcing myself to finish this book. Like, I was struggling to get through it because it was so generic at every single point. And I feel like this book definitely had the opportunity to do kind of what are shows that do this? The Good Place, Rick and Morty, kind of stories that use character archetypes to kind of make fun of common character archetypes. This is very hard to describe. Community does it. That's what it is. Community. Have any of you guys watched Community? There are so many episodes where they make fun of classic action movies or classic heist movies, and all the things that happen in that episode are extremely generic and cliche, but to make fun of those cliche things. And I feel like this book could have done that. It would have been so funny if we got a book with like the villain and like the fact that he has like a very simple sad backstory that somehow explains his entire personality would be like a funny thing instead of like an actual thing. It happens in this book. He has a sad backstory, it explains his entire villaininess. That's just like unironically there, and I was like, if it was ironically there, it would have been funny. We could have had, you know, an ironic monologue moment. There were so many opportunities to make fun of cliche villain characters and cliche hero characters, but instead we just got cliche villain characters and cliche hero characters. But then again, I am very aware that this book was simply not for me. Maybe you would still really enjoy this if you like the kind of quirky Ellie Hazelwood humor, if you like plot-driven stories, if you like the idea of like a boss-employee romance between a villain and his assistant. Could still be funny. Oh, you know how I said that the villain was just like not scary and menacing at all. I want to give my little theory on how this book could have been rewritten a little bit to make the villain an actually more interesting and scary character. In order to do that, I want to mention something that happens at the end, which is a spoiler. So if you don't want to hear that, skip this part. But if you are interested, keep watching. So all the way at the very, very, very end of this book, we do get an insight into the villain's backstory. He monologues his backstory to Evie. And basically the thing is that, of course, he used to be, you know, like one of the heroes, one of the good guys. Classic. It's a classic. It's a cliche. He tells her he was like an apprentice to the good guys, and then the good guys thought his powers were just too evil and too powerful, so they locked him up in a prison for like a month. And then Evie says, oh, it took them a month to let you out? To which the villain answers, they didn't. I let myself out. Sorry, very cool moment. Also, why are we learning literally 17 pages before the ending of the book this very important and interesting cool fact about the villain? You can just see it happening, you know, like this person being locked up in a prison because people are afraid of his powers. And then after a month, he breaks free like Uncle Iroh style. That's what I'm imagining. And then he's like, well, I'm gonna be a monster now. That's super cool. If we had learned this about the villain at the beginning of the book, we immediately would have had this very cool and interesting picture about him, instead of the author just constantly telling us he's scary, he's malevolent, he's evil. We would have had an actual cool picture in our head of like this villain breaking out of the prison, and he would have shined so much more as a character. I would have actually had like an idea about him. That is my suggestion. I think the villain character could have been a lot cooler if the author had simply introduced this little fact about him towards the beginning of the book. Let me know what you think about that. Subscribe for more bookish content. I'm also doing autumnal vlogs on my second channel, Leonie Crystal. So if you like autumnal cozy vlogs, you should go to that channel. I will link it in the description. I want to thank my patrons for supporting me, with a very special shout out to all of my elite Patreon members, and a very warm welcome to our newest members, Nancy Lewis and Brian Klingman. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you soon with another video next week. Goodbye!